Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Blame It on Marketing. I'm very excited for today's episode because I've got obviously Emma here, but also another one of my favorite people I've ever worked with, and that's Amira Kohler. You will be maybe a little bit confused at why I'm so excited about this episode, given the topic and what happened and what led to this episode, but I hope it all makes sense in the end. Without further ado, Amira, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hi everybody, so I'm Amira Kohler and I am a performance management expert and change management obsessive, and I worked with Emma and Ruta very happily in the end as a kind of performance management thought leader and subject matter expert for a wonderful company called Clear Review.
Thanks, Amira. So the reason we want to talk about content and the reason we've got a subject matter expert on the call is not to talk about performance management or change management, but to talk about how to work with subject matter experts, because my two dear friends here, Amira and Ruta, it might have found it challenging to initially work with each other. So I'm not playing referee, but we'll get into why. So I wonder, Amira, maybe let's start off with you. Maybe you could tell us a bit about what happened when we all used to work together from your perspective.
Okay, sure. So I think probably as a little bit of background, if I just explain the reason why I joined the organisation that we worked for. And I was brought in by the CEO and founder because I guess of my deep HR and performance management expertise. So he wanted me to come along with what was obviously a lot of experience and actually a lot of grey hair. I was at least double the age of Ruta at the time, I think, and probably, I think, the second oldest person in the organisation. So I felt that I was coming with a lot of expertise, a lot of opinions, a lot of content knowledge to bring to the organisation. So that's why I was brought in. That felt then to me like when we were going to be working together, I kind of had earned the right to be quite self-directive, and I wasn't used to, and I guess this is one of the key points, and for those thought leaders out there who haven't worked with marketing, whilst I'd worked in an HR capacity with marketing, I had never worked alongside them as a co-collaborator. And what I discovered over our experiences was that we came from really very different places. So shall I sort of explain a little bit about what went wrong? That, from my perspective, one of the first episodes, and Ruta, then you joined pretty early on, I think probably within a few weeks of me joining. It was kind of like, right, come on, let's use this expertise, let's farm it, let's really maximize it. So I think I can't remember whether it was Emma or Ruta, one of you put in a meeting for a couple of hours to create our first piece of stuff together. And that felt great. I was like, I'm well up for that, I've got lots to say. And so I kind of waited for what I thought was coming, which would be an agenda and some sort of view about what we were going to be doing together, what the subject was that we might be writing about. And then but it never came. And then we went into the meeting, which was a couple of hours, so I probably should have been a bit more wary. Because what actually happened was that we sat down and Ruta said, okay, so let's brainstorm what we're going to write and what we're going to come up with, and let's just do it. Let's just kind of prepare it here and now. And I was like, what? Yes, it doesn't work like that for me. I need time to think about it. I need time to, sort of, I don't know, get into my professional muse. I felt like I was kind of very publicly on show in a room of 4 marketing people, of kind of like, well, what have you got to say? What do you think we are going to talk about, and what would you say about it? And almost write it in public, which to me felt incredibly stressful. And then I probably got defensive because it was kind of like, I need time to think about this stuff. And I felt that I had been under prepared, basically. So that's I guess the beginning of the journey of where it started to get a bit tense. But Ruta, what was your view?
I for the life of me don't remember this meeting at all, which probably means that I thought it was fine because it like I don't remember it like being dramatic in any kind of way. But I think you're right. Not everyone works the way we work, and we've just been used to doing that with our CEO Stuart. So we would just put 2 hours in the diary. That way we can get everything out at once. We can get him in there, brainstorm, write it out, and then we can just take away, and do all the detail bits. So I think we're just kind of used to working in that fashion, and we'd never went to Amira and were like, oh, how do you want to work on stuff together? Or like, we never did that. We just kind of sucked her in to our world and our way of doing stuff and expected her to just be okay with things. So I can totally see that being a little bit mortifying. And also, I assume, Amira, you didn't expect us to have so many opinions about performance management and everything that we did. Because I think we had a lot of opinions about what we wanted to say, mainly from like a buyer perspective. So what, they would be interested in and kind of how we need to get to them, I guess, with their challenges. So yeah, I assume that was also a little bit of a surprise, probably.
Yeah. What is quite interesting on reflection, so 4 years on, or whatever it is, I now absolutely could do what you expected me to do then. Whilst it felt a bit painful, I would know now that I need to come with what I think we're going to write. And I guess the reason for Stuart, who was fantastic at this stuff, could do it on the fly was because you learn on the job. I think I've become quite a good marketeer in that I'm quite good at coming up with little one-liners and catchphrases. I almost needed to go through some of the experiences to come out of it understanding what you guys need, because that was the point. I just didn't understand what I knew, what I thought was being the professional in the room, but I didn't know that was really that what you guys needed out of the whole situation, the whole relationship was something quite different. And for you it was more about, less about kind of, let's obsess about the detail and more about getting some stuff out.
I was just going to say, I think this is you guys definitely have, we all were all able to come to an understanding, and we'll get to a little bit about how you guys got there in a bit. But I think one of the reasons, again, we wanted to talk about this is because this happens so often, probably on both sides of the fence. But I think obviously for us, marketing wise, we hear the marketing pain and we don't necessarily hear the subject matter expert side of the story. And I think that's why another reason why we wanted to do this episode was because there are merits to both sides of this, and we need to be able to find a way forward so that we can create content that's good quality and that has impact and all of those kind of things. Because I guess that's the other thing, right, is that we come at it from two different angles, don't we? Amira, I suppose, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I suppose your take is that actually some of this is your IP and your thoughts on a particular subject as an expert. And from our side, I guess we almost represent the audience, but also we want the performance of the piece of content. And so we're always trying to strike that balance, aren't we?
I think one of the key moments of tension that is worth talking about is, so you said, Ruta, you came with a lot of opinions that I probably didn't expect. I came into this expecting that I had the answers about what the audience needed. And I think a lot of subject matter experts think they do. And the point is, we both do. I think I know to an extent some of the content stuff that they need to know, but you guys know what lands, what's going to be interesting, and what's going to get people to carry on reading or whatever. So, and I would have probably got detailed and a bit sort of obsessed about the kind of professional side, and that's sometimes not really the point. I do think that one of the reasons why it absolutely became a very successful working relationship is because I got to the stage of trusting that you guys really did know the audience.
Should I talk about the big conflict? Yeah. So So Amira kind of described, I guess, when, at least for her, because I clearly have shit memory, when things started to be a little bit weird and she wasn't very comfortable with how we worked. And then fast forward, I guess it's another few weeks probably, and we have Amira on her first solo webinar. We did kind of a similar thing. We came up with a topic. Amira went away to work on the slides, and then I needed the slides and got them designed, and I just, me being me, started rearranging some stuff inside the slides because I was like, oh, Amira, talk about this first, then this, and like, you don't need this many slides for this one point. And previously, again, because I've been very lucky with whom I worked with, that has been completely fine, and that was not okay in this situation. So basically, this was on a Friday afternoon. The kind of conversation just escalated and escalated, and bear in mind, I really don't like conflict. So it was just like imploding on itself. Basically, things just kept getting like sent back and forth. I'm sure you lot have been in this situation before, and it was just getting worse and worse. And I was like, oh my god, what is happening? Like, I just want a good webinar. That's all I want. And I want Amira to do a good job, and I think I'm helping her do a good job because I'm telling her what's going to work, and she's just pushing back on everything and blah 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 blah. And I ended up calling our boss and being like, I don't know what to do, like I don't understand what's happening, and this was all over a weekend. I'm also at this point refusing to have a call with Amira because I'm so irritated. I'm like, I can't talk to you right now. I remember that really clearly. I was like, I can't talk to you right now because I'm just so annoyed. Like, I don't know what's going to happen on that call. And conversely, Amira she doesn't like conflict, I assume, but Amira is happy to have conflict if conflict is needed. And I really appreciate that, because actually that conflict was a really important part of my career, and of like understanding that conflict isn't awful and it's okay to have conflict and really good stuff can come out of it. Because I think like how we worked from then on is basically because that happened and we got it out in the air, we came up with a process and it worked, and we both understood each other and could start trusting each other. So that's how I remember it happen. I don't know, Amira, if you want to add anything to my recollection of it.
Well, I think your recollection is quite spot on, actually. At least you do remember that one. I think I definitely remember the toing and the froing, and that every time I wrote some stuff, it's like it either changed or it disappeared or it got written into something that I felt was not my voice, wasn't how I wanted to convey it, there were things missing or changed. Oh my god, I like you, I was so frustrated. And I was like, right, we have to talk about this, because as Ruta said, I'm not averse to conflict. I don't court it, but I don't mind it. So to me, it was like this webinar, because I guess one of the things was that the clock was ticking, and the webinar I think was on the following Wednesday or something.
Wednesday, yeah, something like that.
And it was like, we have to talk about this, because I don't know now whose slides are going to be the ones that we present, and whether they're mine or whether they're yours, and whether if they're yours, will you stop taking my references out? So my view was, on a Friday night, we have to talk about this tonight. I can't have all weekend, because my view was I needed to carry on working on it. And this is one of the other things, I guess, for the subject matter experts. If they're anything like me, because what you're doing is you're trying to come up with something really topical, you basically are changing it right until the last minute, at least your script, even if not your slides. And I kind of now, but I didn't at the time, understand how much the slides have to be set in stone a few days before. And I was like, they're mine, so if I'm changing them until 10 minutes before, it's not your business. Which, from a marketing perspective, really doesn't work. So anyway, so I was kind of demanding that Ruta talk to me on a Friday night, and her view was, I'm not going to be doing that. And so I was just like, well, how does that work then? So that was a very interesting and rather painful experience.
We did have refereeing at some point as well, for those of you wondering. We had a couples coaching call, is what I call it, with our internal coach to talk through this. After, I think it was like after the webinar had happened at some point. So yeah,
And
that
that
was
was the
entertaining.
moment when Natasha said, "You two are both incredibly similar," and I was like, "We are so not similar." Oh God, it was
Yeah.
very funny. Um, the breakdown, as you said, was the beginning of the foundation again to build something better. Because what was really, I was a complete novice, right? I had never done a webinar before, which is one of the other things that was contributing. So I didn't know all sorts of stuff. I didn't know how to work with. I didn't know kind of how much preparation time I'd need for stuff. I didn't know that it was stressful to you for me to be changing the slides. Um, I didn't know that it just doesn't work. And I don't know your view on this, but my takeout, and I have continued to have this view, is that co-collaboration of stuff when it, that kind of something like a webinar, I don't think really works. So I do think that there needs to be a template that the subject matter expert works from, but I don't think it really works to say, to swap, to ping pong it back and forth, because you can't be in my head and I can't be in yours. And actually, I've been on a webinar quite recently where I saw exactly that dynamic on with the co-partner that I was working with. You know, the marketing person had designed the slides, and the subject matter expert had barely even read them, and came on a webinar, and it was a total car crash because they just didn't know what this person was expecting them to say, and it was like, it's clearly not your voice and it's not your thoughts, and it was just like, oh God. So that to me is one of the kind of things that I took out from the whole thing.
So it seems to me like we need to strike a balance between, for everybody, marketing and subject matter experts. There has to be a balance, and you have to find that way of working together that suits both parties. I think one of the things that we're always worried about in marketing is obviously speed and impact. So like Ruta and I will very often be like, it feels like we might be working at breakneck speed to get something out the door, but there's so many reasons why we work like that. And I think it's important as a marketing function to kind of explain to people that. I've actually seen it very recently with a completely different example, that, you know, where you sort of take for granted that you are communicating enough with a group of people, what it is you're working on, why the time matters, all of those sorts of things. Because, you know, I think we've talked about this before, marketing teams are very often horizon scanning, so we're looking at the timing of and the topic and what's going on in the world right now and what's happening with our audience right now. And so timing is quite often everything for us. And if you get a piece of content out even a day late sometimes, then it's like garbage. You might as well not have bothered. So I think that's where we come from, and I think sometimes we're really poor at communicating that. So I guess, yeah, I'm interested in both of your perspectives on that. Like, Amira, obviously before you kind of came to work with us and you guys all kind of came to this understanding, would you have ever thought about content in that way, or were you always kind of on the sort of like, no, it must be perfect kind of train?
Absolutely, I was definitely on the it must be perfect train, and I guess some of that is, you feel like it's a reflection of your professionalism, and it's got to be, and I am a bit obsessive about the neatness of something, and the eyes and the dotting the i's and crossing the t's, so I am a bit of a perfectionist, so I definitely recognize that was always going to be tricky. But I think you're absolutely right, that I think sharing what matters to you both and why is the fundamental point. Because when I heard you guys say the point about it, if it's perfect but it's 2 days too late, it's worse than if it's not perfect and it's on time. And I had never known that that was the point. I just didn't know it. And once I heard it, it didn't necessarily always feel great, because I still would always want it to be perfect, and I would always take longer than you guys would have wanted me to. But at least, because I'm a pragmatist, at least I could then, you know, understand your perspective and sometimes meet in the middle. But sometimes it was just like, oh, get over yourself, Amira, just hand it over. It's good enough is good enough.
Yeah, I was going to say a similar thing. I think from what I remember, when I could start to see that you were getting it is when, for example, we explained how long the lifespan of a certain piece of content might be, and why we put in as much or as little effort as we do in those. So, like, for example, social media posts, they're gone within the day from the timeline. They will never be seen again. A blog is good for, let's say, a month if you're doing a good job, and then, etc., etc., etc. So when you're, if you're working really hard and perfecting a blog for 2 weeks, it's probably not worth your time to do that. It's better to just have it be good enough and get it out. And I feel like that when we basically how we solved all of this was it was an ownership problem essentially, and we came up with a banding of content on of who owns what depending on what band it is. And I feel like when we then started to talk about those examples and kind of put them in context, I feel like then you kind of got it and were like, oh, okay, so like this isn't going to live forever, and I'm not going to be judged by this for the rest of my life and the rest of my career, because it's just gonna go away and get lost in everything else that there is in the world of the internet.
Absolutely. And bearing in mind that, HR people are used to stuff being there forever. It's like, well, not necessarily forever, but until that next iteration. And having a load of people internally judge them on whether it's clear, whether it's communicated well enough. So, to me, it was a really... it wasn't necessarily comfortable to be told it's good enough. It doesn't matter that much. But I did totally learn from that, and in some ways it's incredibly releasing. It's like you don't worry that much on some stuff. Some stuff you do. When we did ebooks, for instance, what we learned, I guess, was that the time, the lead time for certain materials had to be really long, because, as you said, I would think that I got all of the time because I was the one writing it, and you'd be thinking, no, we get a lot of the time because we need to produce it and we need to do all that other stuff. And it's like, I didn't even know about that stuff. So again, it's a lot about coming together and explaining timelines, sharing roles and responsibilities, knowing who's in control and who gets editorial rights, all that sort of stuff. When we clarified that, I think it made a huge difference. And I did love our bronze, silver, gold thing, because it was like, bronze was like, Amira, just give us the bullet points and then we'll write it. And you really don't get to tell us that you would have written it differently. We don't care. It's like, okay, get it. Gold was, I think gold was basically, this is subject matter ownership. So you get to write it, but you need to do it in the timescales that are going to work for the wider project. Really, really good. Silver, I think, was the tricky one, because it was always it was a constant kind of, potential tense area of when something was, I might have an opinion, but so do you. And that's how it is. And so, I think on some of the materials that we wrote, they weren't, we just sometimes had to agree to disagree, and it went out, and it was good enough, and that was fine.
So with that in mind, so obviously we talked a bit there about some of the things that help subject matter experts and marketing work a bit better together. Obviously this is in quite often for people in marketing, this is also founders. So the founder might, because it's worth saying, I think, that it might be the founder that's the person who's the kind of content gatekeeper, not just SMEs. So is there anything else that you guys would add? Obviously we talked a lot about expectation setting and having a bit of a framework in place for content, but what else would you add?
I've got one thing that I can think off the top of my head, and this is from an experience with a client. So they did a bunch of research on something, and then they had basically all their like key points and stats, and then the SME went away and wrote something that included nothing of that research. They just went and wrote their own basically piece of work and what they kind of wanted to talk about, and that was a really costly situation because they had been away writing for like 6 weeks and it was completely not what it was meant to be. So I think in those situations, both setting expectations and making sure you know who owns what, who signs off what is important, but also just being like, hey, we absolutely need you to talk about these things in this piece, otherwise it's not going to work, so that they have at least a frame of reference of what is expected of them. Because again, you kind of can't send someone away with, here's the title of something, go, and here's some stuff that might be helpful. Like, be as specific as you can in those situations.
I can really picture actually, and I think the other secret is having just occasional check-ins, because again, I think that whoever that subject matter expert is that you were working with, they were naive to think, and probably inexperienced to think, that it was all about them. Basically, it's kind of like, you know, I'm the expert, so leave me to it, and that whatever they produced should, in inverted commas, be good enough, you know, should keep the marketing person happy. And there is definitely a bit of a tension, but I think an important one that one has to embrace as the SME, to be checked in on. because I think, you know, you'd rather have that time, that 6 weeks or whatever, you know, because there's always something more that you can say that's cleverer or more pithy, or, you know, better researched or whatever. But it's just not going to work, and it's the kind of having to come together after maybe a week to say, this is the basic stuff, the structure I'm thinking, and bouncing the ideas off, and then again at the end of 3 weeks or whatever. And yeah, I can totally picture the wheels could fall off massively if you don't if you just don't come back together, because that's just like, you know,
Because also writing on brief is not necessarily something an SME knows how to do or has had to do before, you know, like that's typically not their background, and writing on brief is a skill set of its own that, you know, writers have. So yeah, totally agree on the check-ins there.
yeah. And I think what's one of the many reasons why we became, I think, such a really brilliant team was because when I learned to do that and to have the check-ins, what I discovered was, because the whole point is marketing people are highly creative and quick thinking, you guys would then say, I really like that, what about this? And add to it. You know, it wasn't a taking away anymore. It wasn't a sort of removal of my rights. It was a collaborative, creative, explosive moment, and it was like, this is such fun. And I'd come out of these meetings and it'd be like, I just had a meeting with Emma and Ruta and Jabs, and it was really, really cool, and we've, you know, I'm feeling inspired to go and, you know, look up this other stuff and to come up with a different angle. Whereas, you know, at the beginning it was just like, oh god, I've got to
What
go
else are they
going
to take out? Stop editing me.
I think the other point is just to be really human about it, because there's always going to be a bit of conflict. You know, I mean, even in preparing for this podcast, being me, I've done quite a lot of preparation, and I'm you know, and that probably isn't the same for you guys, and it's like, that gives me the heebie-jeebies, but that's because I just don't come from the same, I'm not in the same walk of life, you know. And so if you can then start to build a really, you know, real, authentic friendship and relationship around, this is what makes me tick, this is what motivates me, this is what drives me mad, then you can just, you know, just understand each other that much better.
I think that extends outside of just this bit of conversation, but I think just in general, like understanding the way people like to work. If we had had a very upfront conversation when you joined the team, Amira, because you were new, actually, Amira, how do you like to work? When you're doing this sort of stuff, you know, like what type of person are you? Do you like to prep? I mean, Amira, I remember once we did a webinar with our lovely Natasha, Natasha loves to wing it. She's like Ruta and I, she'll just rock up and she'll get on with it. And Amira is a prepper, and it was like, and I was in the middle of the two of them, and I was like, how do we navigate this? We've got someone who wants to rock up and someone who wants to prep, and ultimately we have to find a way through it, and we have to talk about it, because otherwise we're going to run into a problem, and then on the day the webinar's not going to flow very well. And I think, you know, even that, just trying to have that conversation up front with people, new people on your team, new clients, whatever. I know some people might find that very strange as a strange starting point, but actually it's quite useful. I have a document that I send to all of my clients that's a ways of working, and it even says on there the way I like to communicate. I'm like, don't WhatsApp me unless it's pictures of dogs. Like, I'm just trying to be upfront about the way that I like to work. But other people might, you know. So I think that's something that people should do.
Absolutely. And it's only by sharing that then you can talk about what's reasonable and what's not. Because I do remember that webinar with Natasha and thinking, well, how come you get to wing it and I don't? Because I don't want to wing it. So why do you get to decide? And it was just, yeah, it was. And I remember at the end of that recording, Stuart, I'll never forget, Stuart turning to me and going, well, I bet you're glad that's over. Well, I just thought, oh God, that is so awful. I was like, was it that bad? Oh, it's funny.
So, final question from us. Any tips on what happens when there is a total communication breakdown? And I don't mean, it doesn't just necessarily have to be like subject matter expert marketing. I think just in general, because I think, you know, you guys got near the cliff edge. I think we nearly couldn't bring you both back.
I had to go for a run. If anyone knows me, that is not something I do.
I do remember talking to both of you and having to drink quite heavily in between calls from both of you.
Yeah.
So, not the best way to cope.
Having a mediator is a really good idea. We happen to have both. We had both you, Emma, and Natasha, and I think a bit of Stuart. So, because what was important about that was someone else able to say, you're not 100% right, and you're not 100% wrong, and nor is she. And actually, you both want the same outcome. I do think that it was important that we just got through the webinar and then did it later, because it would have, you know, we just had to both agree to just do this as best as we could, and then, because otherwise you lose the moment to actually get ready for the stupid thing. So I think that I think having a third party help sort of break down some of the miscommunication and the misunderstanding, I think was really, really important. And I think the second thing is just keeping on talking, because once we'd both understood what was the cause of tension, that it was coming from both of us from a good place, but just a lack of communication, a lack of understanding, a lack of, and we put some kind of some constructs in place, like this silver, gold, bronze thing. And then we just came back and we kind of, every now and again we'd check in on whether it was working. Just basic good people relationship skills, I guess, and the fact that we liked each other. I guess at that, after we'd understood where we were both coming from, we could have a laugh about it, I guess, and just being a bit
also,
human. It's always,
this isn't me and you just being civil to each other. We're like, years on from working at Clear Review, we regularly meet up, we regularly talk. Like, I can talk to Amira about anything. Like, like it's not just us being nice to each other for the podcast, kind of situation.
Yeah. But I think to your question, Emma, about what happens if it really breaks down, and I'm very what you see is what you get. If either side fundamentally doesn't respect each other, I think you have to somehow find the words to separate. Because the reason why this could all go from a tense moment to actually a really good working relationship was because I could always, in amongst everything, see that you guys knew what you were talking about, that Ruta was an expert in what she did. She might be driving me mad temporarily, but she was a real professional. And if I hadn't believed that, and whilst styles were incompatible And I kind of thought, you actually don't know what you're talking about. I couldn't have happily carried on working in that situation. So, and you know, I think sometimes you just have to know, go find a different relationship.
And it highly depends on what relationships you have between the two people in conflict, but also the people around you and what kind of culture you have within your organization. Because I can see this going very, very horribly in a culture where, you know, people like to blame each other, people like to rat on each other, people like to play favorites. You know, we didn't have any of that. So like me and Amira could just have a work conflict and it be a work conflict. And we know that, you know, it's all going to be resolved and fine in the end. So yeah, I think we always talk about the best organizations, you know, and the best work environments that we can think of, but I know sometimes that's not the case. And I think a trusted mediator in that sense is good. It might be hard to find one, but if you can, I think that's totally the way to go. And also, I still back to this day the fact that I refused to talk to Mira because I think I wasn't ready to talk to her and I didn't know how to resolve the situation. And I think I would have made it 100 times worse had I talked to her on that Friday. And I know it was super frustrating for Amira, but I think that was still the right call. And I ended up calling our boss as well, and he was able to talk to her for me, kind of thing. So I think that I still back that if you're not good at conflict and you're going to get very angry, maybe just step away and take a little time before you chat.
Yeah, you'll never regret writing a shitty email and then deleting it. You know, when you write it out and then you're like, I've written it out, I'm not going to send it, delete it and then rewrite it. I think you will never regret hitting, or you will always regret hitting send on a shitty email is what I should actually say.
Actually that is another good point, Emma. I think actually having the conversation, a real conversation, because by this stage we were massively in lockdown, weren't we? So we weren't in the office, but we at least had I think it was a Zoom call to kind of with Natasha to mediate this, you know, conflict. What I think would be so unhelpful is trying to do that by email, by some sort of written communication. Oh my God, I mean, how much would that have gone wrong? So yes, I think once you get into any sort of conflict, actually meeting each other in the, you know, facing each other face to face as much as you can, even if it's virtually, is so much more likely to come off as a good thing than, as you said, sending some email and then there being this back and forth of, oh my God, that would be awful. Yeah.
Awesome. Is there anything we should have asked you, Amira, that we haven't?
I think one thing that we were potentially going to talk about was whether, you know, the other day I said something about how you guys, when I was looking back at the notes, you guys said at the time that Stuart didn't need to be sort of edited because he was clear review, whereas I was an SME and I sort of had different status almost. And I think that's quite interesting because I think you then said actually that's kind of changed over the years, and even in the last 4 years you'd probably give, you know, anyone is, unless they're going to do something stupid, any opinion is a good opinion sort of thing. I don't know whether it's worth talking about whether, you know, if I heard that right, whether people would be interested in that. I don't know.
Should we elaborate on that? I think essentially what Ruta and I were getting at when we were sort of saying that what's changed is originally you'd kind of have an organisation and you'd have a figurehead at the top of that organisation, whether that's the CEO, founder, or that's the subject matter expert, and therefore that person kind of had rights to say whatever they wanted. But everyone else within that organisation, especially in B2B, would kind of almost be like, don't have a presence online, don't share your opinions. You know, you're on Twitter, it's always like, opinions are my own. Like, we don't work in that world anymore. Things have moved so far forward, even since Clear Review, which is that, you know, we have entire companies, we can name drop Lavender, for example, who have basically gone out and hired their own like mini team of subject matter experts in sales, marketing, you know, and they are kind of at the forefront of driving that business. So everyone on that team is online, sharing their opinion, sharing their views, and as a result, I would imagine they actually do really, really well. So yeah, that's definitely changed, I think, Amira. So before we would have tried to hide everyone away, and now we're like, no, we want to encourage people to be their own kind of expert in their own field, and therefore by proxy, that makes the company look good. Like Ruta, I don't know if you'd add anything more to that, but that's kind of how it's shifted, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess we were trying to homogenize everyone, but still into like the clear review voice as like a brand. And I think we had good reason to do that. I think because a lot of clear reviews history had been Stuart personally doing sales, going to demos, being, you know, the guy that everyone wants to talk to. We knew he couldn't do that forever, so we wanted to kind of develop a brand voice and a brand identity that didn't need Stuart. So I think we were kind of, that was our rationale for that. And to be fair, we did do it well. But yeah, nowadays it's completely changed, right? Unless you're going to say something stupid, it's okay to say it, and you should probably be doing marketing for yourself at all times anyway, as far as we're concerned as individuals. So yeah, it has really, really changed.
Well, thank you so much, Amira and Ruta, for being so candid and sharing with everybody your own personal experiences when it comes to content creation. I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening who are like, been there, but probably haven't maybe had such a fruitful conversation. So thanks, guys. Some really good tips in there. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon for the next episode.